I was going to, now that I thought about it, do a little intro since everyone enjoys intros. Either that or too many of you have been plagued by the spirits of Wagner's past. But it's happened in our lifetime very recently, and I couldn't resist. It is a beautiful example. You know, we're trying not to get us stuck here, but it's so good. You recall we have mentioned before, and surely you have taken occasion to note, if nothing else, in your own life, you can still see it in history. You can see it in that which has not been writ in the books. You can see it which is engraved upon the DNA within the genetic line of succession in man. But when life changes in the secondary sense, which is the only thing that's of any particular interest to people, right? That is, unless I can... People would normally say, unless I could grow another 3 or 4 inches, or unless my eyesight would improve. But I started to say something of a more personal nature. It's only secondary history that is history. But anyway, what we have noticed in the past is that when life does change, it is orderly. It is a kind of stable change. It is certainly unsurprising. And yet, that which happened, we're taping this for those, if this survives, anytime anybody sees it, this is February of 1991. But last year and a little part of the year before, just within a period of 4 or 5 months, astounding external change took place in Eastern Europe. Now, when it's mentioned, it's the just almost overnight, historically speaking, almost overnight collapse of communism. Just, they started hitting, if you recall, East Berlin, Czechoslovakia, Bulgaria, Romania. It was just almost overnight. One happened, and there within a period of a few months, just, if this had been history, if you were reading it in a book, the kinds of changes that took place that you were sitting there, listening to on the radio every now and then, glancing in the paper, is the sort of change, now listen for a minute, because you know this has nothing to do with history or politics. It's something else. But had that occurred long enough ago, a couple hundred years ago, to where it seemed like to most people real bad, that is ancient history. If this sort of thing had happened, which it did not, you won't find in history books, those kind of drastic changes did not happen like that. They did not happen literally overnight. When they happened, when there was a huge change in the political system, in external events out at city level, when they did happen, it was a long, drawn-out process. One of the most famous wars, which did very little from one viewpoint, was the Great 100 Years' War. And about all it did was after about 101 years, as France and England went, Jesus, we're worn out, us too. And yet that's one of the most famous wars, I think, because the title sounds good. Well, some of the other conflicts never did have that good a name to it. If they'd had the Beatles or somebody around, or Cole Porter, to put names on those wars, some of those minor skirmishes would be a lot bigger today than they are. But do note that which happened in history, the fall of the Roman Empire. According to what you want to pick up, the Roman Empire, boy, that was one of the world's great fixed fights. If we bring it up to a modern day, well, kind of boxing, you can read one place that the Roman Empire, and it fell, and some historian will point out the first time any Huns showed up. First time any Huns made any noise somewhere across the Danube, somebody will write down even today, well, that may not have been the literal end of the Roman Empire, but that was it. I mean, it was all over. And then people attribute it to, you can find it listed as 300, and then 350, and then 450, and then 453. And then you'll find even to say, well, the real end of was 500 A.D. The point is, no history lesson, but by now, do you see that the way life normally changes, we're not talking about good or bad, we're talking about expansion, growth, but right for a second, let's just call it change. It generally happens in a way that I've just called, to give you a spectrum of it, it is stable change, even after it's over, that it seems to be a great change. That is, well, wait. 50 years ago, if we were standing, let's say, in 453 AD, 455, and we looked around and we went, boy, I don't even recognize the old neighborhood here in Rome, especially after the Vandals got through. We're talking about the original Vandals, not these Johnny-come-latelys. The eponymous Vandals, the ones who gave us the great word. At any rate, you would look around and say, boy, I don't even recognize this place. I only left Rome 30 years ago, and it's almost, the whole place is gone. So it would seem to be a great change, but do notice, even at that time, it seemed like well, never mind at that time, but looking back now, the best history you can find, extreme change does not happen in an extreme manner. It is still, in a sense, a kind of stable, orderly change. Well, here come the nuns, whenever they started. 300, and then 325. Here they come again. It's not surprising anymore. Then 400. Jesus. Now they brought the Oligarchs and the Vandals with them. How long is this going on? But it is not a surprise. And in a sense, although from one view, the pro and con polarized view, from somebody, those living there in Rome, especially those dealing probably in real estate, they considered matters are a bit unstable. But do you see, it was not unstable. It was a kind of orderly, of course, from their view, the con view of the Romans, it was a kind of chaos, but it was orderly chaos. Here they come again. Here they come again. I just wanted you to note that if things were still equal, if we were playing with reality, and we move now from 50 or 100 years from now, and it was remembered in the way it happened historically, what happened in Eastern Europe would just be, history books would now have a big gorder on the side of them. Or where it got to that area, it would have some kind of big old finger that would say, systemic transient anomaly coming up. That it would just, people should be wandering around. Now let's jump from history to right now. Some of you kept up a little bit. And one more time, it doesn't matter that you're interested in history, that you've got any vested interest. But those who are interested, which is the middle of life's civilized bell curve, they should be, in a sense, still, it's been over a year, people should still be kind of wandering around babbling over, do you realize that this is absolutely, an anomaly doesn't cover it, this is just singular in the history of man, that this kind of political change, and literally, in several cases, just overnight, but not through some sort of tangible, flammable conflict that, say, paralleled the 100 years downfall of the Roman Empire and squished it into 24 hours. It wasn't even that. It was almost, not that there wasn't a few bullets or something fired, but it was almost as though these whole countries, one night they got off work, a bunch of people, and they kind of looked around, and everybody kind of went, well, screw all this stuff. And now I know there's a bunch of trouble that night, and people got rowdy, and several people had to grab their Swiss bank books and leave town. But it was almost like the next day they got up, and it was as though a whole 40 years worth of history had gone just like that, with no great tangible upheaval. The upheaval was in the kind of generally stable, predictable, orderly change that takes place. Getting now to the real point, would you note that it's almost, I know it's still written up and it's referred to, somebody will be writing about, and they'll be writing about what's going on in some other part of the world, and they'll say, especially since the downfall of East Germany. And they'll just be, and if not parenthetical, it'll be, between commas, it's just a reference point. It is almost as though that did not happen. Now, I know that it happened, and I know that people still refer to it, but note, if you can hear me, in any general context, in any comparable view of it from an ordinary level, that period of whatever it was, 4 or 5 months, should have historians, civilized people, intelligent people, I'm talking about the ordinary secondary level, still, that should be the topic of conversation of what have we lived through. What kind of change do you understand? Two civilized, intelligent people sitting somewhere, one say, surely you understand. I'll ask you rhetorically, since we're just sitting here having a G&T. But does it strike you how extraordinary this? I mean, this is even beyond such context as believing that you lived at some time when gods walked the earth, or when Virgil lived down the street. That this is just unbelievable, and yet it's just almost a footnote. Well, yeah, that was back when all this was going on. Why? See, because it's not that such as this cannot happen. We've covered this before, and many times I'll refer to it in a certain way, and I know a lot of you look blank. When things like this happen, in other ways we've covered it before, and I've referred to it, it's almost as though it happens, and then people look off like, well, because it is too abrupt. It is too abrupt to move from the area of facts into what would generally be the expected, orderly realm, to go from the acts into the facts. It was too abrupt. And it's like it skipped. And I'm saying skipped on the basis that it can be changed, it may be looked at differently historically, which is not of any particular interest to you, or it shouldn't be. But I'm saying it right now, it almost skipped a stage that may never back up completely. But it almost went from acts, that what happened. And all of you know, downfall of East Berlin, and then East Germany, and then putting back together, and the downfall of communism, and what was assumed to be the absolute iron grip tyrannical regimes in all those other countries of Eastern Europe. And it went from those acts themselves, instead of going into the facts of people, as I was trying to sort of dramatically get you to consider, that men should still be talking about it. That should be historically, not just limited to the local basis of the countries and the regimes, but just historically, people should be saying, is this not astounding? This has never, ever happened. I'm a historian. I am an expert, and I'm telling you there is nothing, not just in the Western world, not just the Occidental, the Oriental worlds, Africa, the Pacifics. There is nothing historically that even begins to approach what happened. I mean, it'd been one thing. It would have been astounding, based upon historical precedent, if Germany, if the communist regime in East Germany had fallen, that'd have been enough. I mean, I could have made my living the rest of my life just writing about that, I believe. I'm still talking for an ordinary historian. But then for them to unify. And immediately they began to talk about, well, if we work on this 10 or 12 years, son of a bitch, it was like 6 months. And it was all over. That would have been enough. But then you got to start naming Poland, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Romania, Bulgaria, Yugoslavia, now Albania. We don't even want to go into that. Next thing you know, they're going to liberate that stone duck out of the museum. I just want you to hear. Do you hear me that you know enough history? I tried to give you a quick lesson, not an expert, but it literally, from any other historical precedent and viewpoint, what went on there in a period of months is singular. Nothing has ever approached that in the change in the external world, not counting primary upheavals of typhoons and earthquakes. But in the secondary world of man, there is nothing that even comes close. It's not even the same ballpark as what went on in a period of months. Just one of them would have been astounding. But there were so many, and notice, not just you, but the historians, the writers now, it is almost a sidebar. It's already almost a footnote in what I'm suggesting to you, because life does do it, but here it is, you live through it, and why I couldn't resist finally trying to push your little nose right to the window. And it's almost now forgotten. It almost fell into some sort of abyss of near forgotten. I'm not going to dwell on this forever, but surely some of you see. It's obviously not forgotten, but notice how it's been treated. And nobody could analyze it. Nobody's even noticed that. It was just taken it, well, it's a fait accompli now. There's nothing. Yeah. But it was an astounding, staggering, singular, unique, unbelievable, extraordinarily surprising fait accompli. Yeah? When things are too abrupt from a secondary level. It's not too abrupt for life or it wouldn't have happened. But when they are too abrupt, they do not go through that orderly process in the predictable or in the normally experienced manner of facts always following acts. Because they did, it's now part of history. But notice, instead of it being in any way still representative in man, now it's in the world of facts. In other words, the acts are already over. They were over the day after Chescu had to run for it. At some time, the acts seemed to be over. That is, that particular regime in some country was done for. And so now it's the world of facts. As always, the facts follow the acts. But it's almost as though the facts had a life of their own of any particular importance in the center stage of contemporary consciousness, for a day or so, maybe a few hours. But it was like it was so abrupt, everybody went, well, Jesus, how long does the Super Bowl? Boy, spring training coming up, when they were witness to acts that were just completely out of the ordinary, predictable, orderly change of life. One more time. As always, this kind of activity literally has no interest in the politics other than just a hobby, just something to read. But the comments I'm making have nothing to do with communism, capitalism, all of that. It's change. The electrical basis of change in the way that life out here, just an ordinary world, a secondary world, the way it normally changes, and when it does happen abruptly, and I don't have to go back and make up history. See, I'd have to make up to pull this kind of example, because when it's happened in the past, it doesn't make history. And so I'd have to say, well, here's a tale, or here's a fable. I had to put in a Kyroots. Because whatever it was that did happen that was too abrupt in the past, you never heard about it. And so I'd have to doctor it up or change it around. But here it is, you lived through it, and I let it go on now for about a year. And so now you should be able to see what I'm talking about. I let it kind of mellow and ripen. But notice it is now. Pick up any Newsweek, newspaper. Pick up a history book. It's probably already written. They've got them out. They change them or revise them every few years. But just pick up the important, the up-to-date news magazines. And it's almost as though that was so far back, or it was so, it's just like it almost didn't exist. Oh, well, yeah, it exists, and everything's different. Yeah, sure enough. Oh, yeah, I know all about that. But from one view, based upon the way things happened in the past, from one view, literate, sophisticated, historically knowledgeable men and women, that should be still the burning topic of conversation, just on the basis of how extraordinary. There's no precedent for this historically. And it's now just almost a parenthetical aside, just some little reference point that they'll be talking about the great changes now of the size of the first quarter investment from Western Europe and the United States into the crippled Bulgarian economy, and there'll maybe be comma, especially since the downfall of the old communist regime, comma, and that's it. The article may be 2 or 3 pages, and you think Bulgaria, Bulgaria almost, by some reports, almost made, Albania look, relatively civilized. And here it is, if you remember Bulgaria, or Romania, it was literally almost overnight, just an abrupt change in the flow of energy that revealed and manifested itself in the political life of man, which is just the secondary life of man. And this change was so abrupt that it's almost now not a fact. That is not a fact in the sense that compared to past changes in life, that kind of fact should still be the burning topic of conversation. They should just still be just on everyone's mind that's interested in the secondary world. But when life makes abrupt changes, notice, it just almost skips 2 or 3 measures, 4 or 5 pages, this kind of orderly succession of facts, fattening up, stabilizing the acts. When it gets too abrupt, I say skip a step. That's not a great phrase, but there's no way to describe it because this has never been attempted to be talked about on this planet. It just, I've already described it. Do you hear it? It did not go. It's not forgotten. People know about it. But by God, something, a fleshy part that you would normally expect the succession of facts following acts in a way that's as astounding to a revolutionist, or it should be to you, just as astounding as what historically happened out there should strike you, it's just as astounding that it's not that taken to be that astounding. Well, that should astound you for a second until you realize, well, he described it, I bet, fairly correctly. Or you should feel the reality that it was so abrupt, it does not fit into the normal B comes after A. All you people learn your algebra, and then we'll go on to trig. When it happens too abruptly, and of course, I didn't mean to frighten anyone, but I want you to understand that that has absolutely no possible use, pertinence, significance to one's own eyebrows. So much for the 2-hour introduction. Well, it's just one of the things. You lived in a place where there was an anomalous bump in the movement in the carpet that life lays over the secondary world as it begins to expand the subfloor, and it always lays down a carpet. And it always hollers stuff like, big sale on carpet, or who picked out that color, so that you look around factually, and when acts start getting a little undulating, it might make some people seasick, cerebrally speaking, life kind of distracts it with the facts that immediately follow up the acts. Wait a minute, who died here? And suddenly it's a fact. Somebody says, well, it's nobody you know. It's not you. Oh, good. But you lived through it. I don't have to make up anything. I don't have to conjure up something that did happen that history doesn't know about and me have to flesh it out. It happened. And at least relatively or rhetorically speaking, then I'm assuming that none of you noticed it exactly. I hope you did. But to notice that not only was that astounding, what happened, but to a would-be revolutionist mind for a few seconds, is equally astounding, actually more so, but it equally as astounding is how come nobody was continually astounded by it? They were astounded, for a day, I remember. It made the headlines. But now what is it? It's a parenthetical aside. It's a historical footnote. Like, well, since the downfall. Like, since the downfall that they're talking about, 11 B.C. This was last year. After 40 years of it being in a stable, predictable way, it just overnight. Doesn't anybody remember? How excited you... Well, back to, or finally to, the heart of tonight's program. And I'd like to say it's been nice being here, and we're out of tape. Regarding, a bit more, if you recall where we were last time, regarding acts and facts and their relationship to the primary and secondary, etc. And we left off, just to bring you up to date while I was trying to pick it back up, that we were noting how it is that men can pretty well accept acts. In the example I use, I tried to figure an extreme one, is a man, for instance, can accept the act of him dying, but not so much so the facts regarding his, if not imminent, his ultimately unavoidable demise. So that things that would appear to be quite disruptive, quite disorderly, quite unprofitable, quite costly, quite annoying to you, the act itself, men can pretty damn well accept. And that's really a little literary flowering. They can pretty well accept. But not so when it comes to the facts of it, when it comes to someone talking about it, when it comes to a doctor telling you you're going to die soon. Oh my God! It's not the same thing as the act. Now, where we stopped last time, I was threatening, and since we're all knights of the square table, I know it was a poly something or other, the way it was finally fixed. But let us prove again the continuing worth and dependability of our veracity by making good on the threat to mention time. Would you consider remapping what we're talking about acts and facts? And consider the good old concept of the line of time, what seems to be running through the three-dimensional world, what seems to be running through the three-dimensional polarized intellectual perception and feel of time. That is, you imagine a line running from your left to right, except for those of you who might be Arabic or Yiddish or Chinese, and it goes this way and that way. But let's assume that you are, as God intended, a good Southern Baptist person. You picture a line in the three-dimensional world running from your left across the page to the right, and over here on your left is the past. And over there on the right, we consider this going, three-dimensional speaking, and to infinite degrees. And over here is the future. And then right here would seem to be, if you draw a line, a little horizontal line through this, a vertical line through this horizontal line from the past to the future is right here, and then right there is some sort of now. That's where we are right now. We're not living, this is a Wednesday, so on the line, Wednesday would be the line right here, cutting up your particular line, or our collective line of time. A tri-divided, a tri-allotted, which is about the best representation of time to ordinary people. You can't disagree with it. In that sense, can you find any collateral relationship between acts and facts in this kind of ordinarily perceived tri-divided line of time? In that, acts, relatively speaking, of course, but acts would seem to be, in some sense, more a matter of a present, that little line. Whereas facts would seem to be more aligned to the past and the future. Could any of you see, even to take my example of the difference between actually being seated comfortably, having root canal work done, the act, the difference between that and the dentist telling you, be sure and be back here next Thursday because I see in your future extensive root canal work. Are you sure? Couldn't I just die? No. Sorry. Well, it'll cost more, but can you see any possible collateral connection? I don't know how collateral could be unconnected. Between what would seem to be the ability for men to generally accept acts and not be able to do so in the same way when it comes to the facts, even the facts directly related to the acts, whatever they were that I meant in the first part of the sentence, or anyone that you can imagine, from death to dentistry. Can you see any possible connection between that and this great intellectually, or this allegorical, but decent picturization, but tri-allotted line going from the past to the future and the present being in here, and this sense of the present? Don't take anything metaphysical, just right now, an ordinary person would say, yeah, I know the difference between the past and the future and the present. You know, without any philosophical discussion, everybody has got to. Your secondary, the nervous system operates on that kind of basis. That, yeah, right now, are you going to call the present right every little second or right now? All you got to do is this. You know what the past is, don't you? Yeah. You know what the future is, yeah. All right, anything that's left is now. And people, yeah, that's... But the now, the closer you get to a feeling of right now, of some present in this line, do you see that that gets very much to be more a matter of acts, that might be the area wherein acts exist, but relatively speaking, facts seem to fall somewhere else. They seem to... It's not a fact. As a matter of fact, whenever somebody says that good old phrase, is that a fact? Just think to yourself, under what kind of conditions does that normally happen? Of course, whatever it is, any fact, remember, I gave you a good near 5D theorem of unknown physics. It's simply, facts follow acts. Just forget all that little conditions I gave you. That's a damn fact. So that being true, no matter what a fact is, it is somewise a split millimeter later than any fact. Any act from which the fact derived, was derived, grew from, succeeded from. So, I was just going to say, since a bunch of you laughed when I threw in that little... Just normally, just feel yourself when people hear something or see something and go, is that a fact? What is it that normally seems to inspire or to spur someone to really go, is that a fact? Since we've already mentioned the preface, I would like to point out that while I was suggesting that, comparably speaking, which is not a comp out, but comparably speaking in the three-dimensional world, which you are always doing, that my suggestion that acts in that useful, subversive division of things into acts and facts, that in the matter of acts you would be talking more in what would seem, what would feel to anyone, taking my little mapping for a second, would seem to be more some sense of a present. Whereas when you start dealing with facts, no matter what the facts are, no matter what acts they're referring to, the facts themselves, as opposed to being immediately tied to a sense of a present, and it doesn't have to be real abrupt, but it begins like the graduation of sound waves, the trickling down of water. It gets away from this little center vertical line, let's say, representing some sort of present. It begins to kind of trickle and gets closer and closer to any sensation that doesn't really matter, to either the past or the future when you're dealing with facts. That it only seems, or it would seem more so, that acts are in some way tied to, assuming there is such a thing, men perceive there to be, a real present, a now, that acts would be more tied to that, and then relatively speaking, facts, even the facts regarding some act that occurred right now, the facts then are more in line, more attuned to, more cooperative with the past and the future. Except, I was going to say, since we already brought it up, except when the act, whatever it was, is too drastic. Such as what I was pointing out, suggesting to you about the downfall of the erstwhile considered bloc of East Communist countries almost overnight. When it gets to be too drastic, then it's, though the facts, that is the acts already happened, the downfall of these governments, then the facts of them seem to a relative degree, if it's too abrupt, seems to kind of slip through memory cracks. Well, yeah, we know what happened, but we're busy. Other things going on. Kmart has a new logo. They're threatening a whole new season of divorce court. Oh, I'm sorry, promising. Sorry. Somewhat as a little aside, but let me just mention, because I'm sure many of you know this or read it. I was going to suggest to you that just what I was trying to map out about the possible, quite operational relationship between acts and a sense of a present in a tri-allotted line of time, and then facts being more a matter of being related to the past and the future. You might consider that this is the basis of this great, very ancient, and right still today, I'm sure, the occultist, mystics' dream, or their notion of some kind of now, of supremely important. I mean, history is littered with it, and I know in our lifetime, I've seen some more of it, that whole books, some kind of home course study in how to be a unilateral mystic, but that you've got to live in the now. And it can be described that, ordinary consciousness, mundane, carnal thinking, and low-level spirituality, people live in the past, or they worry about the future. And if you were a true, right-thinking, humane, mystic, intellectual occultist, or whatever it would be, there's some kind of, now, live in the now. And nobody can really, they can't say much more about it other than, don't live in the past. You understand you shouldn't go around worrying about the past. Well, I understand that, sir. And you can't just live in dreams like, maybe when I die, I'll know. No, if you're going to follow our course and become some kind of spiritual and emotional, intellectual, enlightened person, you've got to live in the now. It has a sound to it. It vibrates in people. And they go, yeah, and they can't really describe it. I was going to point out that those of you that might be aware of that. There's a basis, as always. But also, if you see it, you understand why nobody can really say, well, all right, this very important now. If you could live in the now, your whole consciousness, the way in which you are connected to the universe and the forces, it would be completely different. There is some validity to that. But then people go, well, what is it? Well, buy the book. Buy the book. But you read. And just the title gets people about the benefits of living in the, quote, now, in big old letters. You think, yeah. If I could live for the present, live for the moment. And it's not, of course, just our cultures. Some of you grew up in the 60s. Even Country Joe McDonald. And your neighborhood local dope dealer. People were thinking, yes, that some narcotics throughout history, and even up until the 60s. Of course, I don't know whether it was the dope or wearing those bell-bottom. But at any rate, as many people partake of certain narcotics throughout history, and it seems to affect. They say it does. Well, they're correct. I'm not trying to hedge it. That they say that at that time when they're on those particular hallucinogenics, that their sense of time has changed to such a way that for the first time in their life they feel like that they're living in some kind of immediacy, that they're living actually and dealing with the present instead of daydreaming about the past and all the felonious, annoying things that may have happened instead of dreaming, well, maybe someday I'll do better. It was like I could come to grips with the past, with the present, and really deal with it. You got any more of those bennies? Let me have them. Boy, I'll be all right. There's a basis for all of that. And I just thought I'd mention that as we went by. There was some more I'd like to see if you could tie together. We had previously mentioned in a Kyroot a day or so ago, do you recall, that it went like this, more or less. Benefits of taking a real estate course. You can always say, yes, you could buy these 2,000, more or less, acres. All right, it went more or less like this. One way to work problems into a manageable scheme of things is to force them to match up with solutions you've already got. Speaking on behalf of my friend Kyroot, may I say, as always, I don't always say it, sometimes on Tuesdays, but that there may be more to that than simply something that made you laugh. And of course you ought to thought, why does that make me laugh? It's not a joke. I was going to ask you to consider any possibility of connecting that up with the idea of acts and facts and a few other things. So let's try it this way. Now you've got the opening, you got the setup. That one way to work problems, and you can put problems in quotation marks, just what everybody calls problems. We're not yet identifying those were problems as being irreversible, sissies. No. So don't cry yet. Especially those of you living in southeastern part of South America. But don't cry yet. Just consider problems the way ordinary people consider them, the way that it struck you all of your life at the old neural site. That one way to take problems and to work them into some manageable, I'm talking about an individual level, some manageable scheme of things, is to force those mothers to line up, to match up with some solutions you already got, because you got some solutions. But now, let's play, how about A through D query? A. Might acts and facts have any collateral relationship to problems and solutions? I should say so. I'm not responding to that. I'm responding to somebody who went, and I was just saying I should say so. B. If solutions can cure, can solve problems, might facts be able to cure acts? Or the always popular and forever overlooked, the all-important vice versa? But I guess being slightly confused is being confused enough. But if, and I don't mean this in any strange way, just ordinary intelligence tells you that this is a fact, Jack, that if indeed solutions solve problems, that's not open to debate. If solutions solve problems, remember the first part I was asking, could there possibly be a collateral relationship between acts and facts and problems and solutions? If, over here, as everyone knows, if solutions solve problems, which they do, then could it be that facts in some way could solve acts? Do I even have to tell you that one? I mean, even people as pedestrian, don't write me, all those of you who are walking, as psychologists and psychiatrists, the institutions thereof. In the ordinary world, in everyday affairs, can you not find your own examples wherein it could be a not untoward description to say that there are areas wherein that facts seem to help cure acts? What in the hell do you think is the basis of talking analysis? Because you could take a very cheap, sarcastic, strip-them-to-the-bone Jack view, if life had you wired up to do such, and say, what kind of childish, what kind of deluded crap is this that somebody goes and pays another human being several $100s an hour to talk to him about things that happened to him, about how his mother got drunk on his 5th birthday and sat down on his birthday cake. A real fleshy woman at that, and ruined the cake. Nobody wanted to eat it, just trust me. And so from one view, we're not talking about people now, we're talking about what would seem to be the ordinary structures of the neural flow of energy and the intellect. You could say, what kind of childish folly is this to believe that something had happened, that your mother was a drunk, your father ran off and left you, your father beat you to the point that he broke your leg and you're still a cripple. That's an act. I mean, we can still see it. And you're going to tell me that you're going to sit around and talk about it in some way. I don't know what the hell you think you're going to do. Maybe in some way you go, well, I feel better. You still got to, look at your leg, you're a cripple. Facts are not going to change acts. Are you sure? No. Now, if you're in the city, you can be sure. But if you're in the city, get the hell out of here, you sissy. Now you can cry. If solutions can cure problems, what else are they for? Is it possible that facts can cure acts? And we're out of time, but don't just, until we pick it back up, don't just say, well, you're just talking about referring to a kind of verbal rationalization, or people going, well, I guess my father had his own problems, and yeah, I do hate to walk like Chester, but the man was a drunk himself. He had a goiter on the side of his head. Ma, that was a goiter Paul had, wasn't it? Well, so he had his own problems. It's not some kind of, I'm going to talk and rationalize it away and figure, well, it's all water under the grandfather by now bridge. It's not that. I could pick out more personal examples, but being out of tape, and since we can take full use of the intro, consider it this way even. If what I was suggesting to you had some validity, that what happened in Eastern Europe, this almost overnight, unprecedented, as far as history knows, unprecedented series of events happened, and it were too abrupt for life to accept and go from acts into the normal, orderly progression into facts, could you see that still, in a sense, life cured this abrupt act, that series of acts that happened, by the facts? In this case, the facts are that people just sort of went, oh, that was nothing. No. And it just Can you see? If that was, I thought maybe that'd help a little. But it goes on in your individual life. It goes on in everybody's life. That is, being an outlet for energy, being a transformer, a transferring agent of energies. That there is a way in which, that I am suggesting to you, boys and girls, that there is something you do every day that's not completely unlike the tango. That solutions cure problems, and there may be a direct, everyday, tangible corollary to that wherein facts cure acts, which of course is impossible unless you mean that metaphorically and psychologically, which I'm proud to say I don't. And we have literally run out to even suggest or to remind you that you could think about the opposite, that acts could cure facts. Oh, I don't want to think about it.